Was thinking about games to, you know, analyze after college football this week. There were a couple teams that I knew I wanted to cover, and I felt one that I felt a sense of obligation to cover was I'm going to just compartmentalize this and do North and South Carolina together because I did previews of both those programs in the preseason, and I've been following them a lot more than I ever really thought I would, and thank God I did. I mean, but unfortunately, for almost all of the wrong reasons. I'm going to start by talking about the Georgia Tech North Carolina game. Then I'm going to kind of shift and talk about Alabama and South Carolina, but I'm going to keep a Carolina. We're going to keep a Carolina perspective for this segment. Going into the Georgia Tech North Carolina game, I mean, North Carolina was coming off a loss to Pitt last week, losing 34-24. You saw some positives. I mean, Jacoby Criswell, I think, has been playing a lot more mistake free. I think his completion percentage has gone up a little bit. And, Pitt is a tough defense to play as well. So I do give, North Carolina a ton of credit there. And in terms of, them offensively, I mean, Omer Hampton rushed for 200 rushing yards against the Georgia Tech defense that, for the most part has done pretty well, stopping the run. Especially, you think of some of the other teams they played, like Syracuse, for example. You think of Florida State, and a couple other teams there I can't think of off the top of my head. But the reason I wanted to cover the Carolinas is because it's been so devastating to watch them throughout this year for a number of reasons, and also shout out to Tar Heel Illustrated for giving me a subscribe. It's definitely always appreciated and showing the love and everything. But back to North Carolina. I mean, one of the things that have been fascinating me most about this program is one, I just love Mac Brown. I think he's just such a great example for college football, and the love and the passion, the enthusiasm is there. But it's one of those things where for every time I get to watch, our Mario Hampton, light it up running the ball, every time I get a great press conference seeing Mac Brown, I come back to a Saturday of so much confusion and so many ups and downs where, you know, I was watching this North Carolina and Georgia Tech game at the airport, and I was thinking to myself, Georgia Tech, man, Georgia Tech really has this game under control going into the fourth quarter. I'm probably just going to shut this off and go back to Alabama, South Carolina. But hey, what do you know? All of a sudden, Georgia Tech, blows a fourth quarter blows is pretty much blowing the fourth quarter lead. You know, Haynes King has been kind of struggling, and you know it it really just wasn't the best day for Georgia Tech either. I mean, he went for 11 for 22 for 127 yards, and one thing I will give North Carolina credit up until the debacle at the end of the game is they pretty much shut down one of their you know better you know, better two receivers there too. Although, Jeff Collins, who replaced Gene Chiswick as defensive coordinator this year and got a really hairy $11 million buyout from Georgia Tech too. So, he'll be fine no matter what. But I think going into this more than anything is you have to think about this. You have to think about how North Carolina at the very least wasn't able to get this game into overtime. I'm not saying that they should have won the game, but I am going to say that it is pretty much inexplicable that you can somehow not get this game into overtime. I mean, granted, North Carolina did a lot more positive things that I think are getting a little bit overlooked. I mean, I talked about Marion Hampton getting 200 plus yards. I talked about, for example, also Georgia Tech had offense. They went 4 for 11 on third down. They, weren't it didn't exactly play the most disciplined game with 7 penalties too. And, you know, I think the one thing also in terms of, now we're shifting to negative is, 6 for 6 in the red zone, and obviously the play of the game that ultimately decides it is a moment in the game where North Carolina essentially ties up the game, and I think you know, everybody in the country essentially thought that Georgia Tech was going to run a draw play or two and get this into overtime, which would be obviously the most logical thing that you can do in that moment, considering that you gave up this huge lead and North Carolina has all the momentum. There really is no reason whatsoever why Georgia Tech should be running any plays at all. So they run one play, and I think it gets like 6 or 7 yards. I think it might have been like I think it was like a short pass or something. So I'm like, okay, whatever, no big deal. And what's funny about this whole thing is even the fact that the commentator said, you know what, it looks like Jeff Collins going to be playing some soft zone coverage, and you know, because you have to think to yourself, okay, you have to understand the situation too. Like you pretty much know going into this that they're really just going to run a play or two, and usually you get 1 or 2 yards, and then you run out the clock, right? But at this point, the Georgia Tech's about at the 40-yard line, and then boom, just a straight run down the middle. And if you go back and watch that replay, it was pretty much inexcusable the way that defense was lined up. The defense was lined up as if it was 3rd and 13 and they had to pass the ball and they were down by 7. That's the coverage that I thought that they were in going into it. Because as soon as I saw it, I looked and I'm like, I almost thought they were out of position. That's how messed up this entire situation was. And then as soon as yeah, and then as soon as they give Haynes the football, boom, he just takes off like a rocket, 61 yards, and everybody is just left speechless. And if I were Mac Brown, I don't know how Jeff Collins got back to Chapel Hill with a job. I mean, you think to yourself too, that's been the Achilles heel for this team this entire season, and it also goes to show that I think one of the common criticisms that Mac Brown has gotten over the years is his, let's just say questionable coordinator hires. And this game versus Georgia Tech, I think for me, really kind of nailed in the coffin in terms of, you know, like why is he hiring these people? Because I mean, even at Georgia Tech, he struggled with defense there, and then for him to come there, I mean, I think to myself, okay, you give up 70 versus James Madison, which you're already on thin ice there. You've already pissed off all of Chapel Hill already at the moment, and to add the fuel to the fire, you know, setting up your again, the defense obviously didn't make the play either, but they were clearly out of position the entire time. And I think going into the rest of the season for North Carolina, I mean, right now they're 3-4, 0-3 in conference play. So at this point, you're really at best playing to get into a bowl game. But I think moving forward, I think one of the things you kind of have to ask yourself is the following. I mean, can you get yourselves to a bowl game? Because the ACC, the next couple games on their schedule aren't super ideal, but we'll see what happens. I don't have the games in front of me, so we'll have to see what happens there. I think Jacoby Criswell is still kind of finding his own, and I think he has. I think you can argue you've seen some legitimate progression from him. I think he's being a little bit more patient in terms of trusting his protection a little bit more. I give him I give him some credit in terms of being able to find the right receivers, and being okay with saying, okay, the original read or two isn't there, just get rid of the football. I give him some credit, a couple of those plays where for the most part, I think since he was the third string, he kind of thought to himself, oh, I have to kind of go in and be Dan Marino. I'm like, you don't have to be Dan Marino, you can just be a game manager, let yourself rely on Hampton a little bit, and then use your athleticism a little bit, and really kind of make yourself sort of a dual threat too. Because for this game he had 73 rushing yards too. So it's not like he's not no slouch. He's an athletic guy too, and as long as Mac Brown and this offensive staff can continue to put Chris Well in a situation where he can continue using his athleticism. I think the North Carolina offense can continue to still be consistent, but it's the defense again that continues to be a really big struggle. And it really was up until that point. I mean, North Carolina's defense didn't play awful, but it's one of those things where it's just boneheaded decisions that put themselves in these situations over and over again. And with that said, now that I pretty much talked about North Carolina, I feel like it's fitting now to talk about South Carolina too, because you know it was almost a 1-2 punch in terms of watching Carolina football this weekend. Now discussing the South Carolina Alabama game, I went into this thinking to myself, Alabama is maybe, if I'm going to use a WE reference, I'm not going to say that he is about to get eliminated from the Royal Rumble, but they're teetering a little bit. I mean, we've seen them have some legitimate weaknesses that I think other programs are going to exploit later into the season if they don't figure that out. Particularly, the defense has been playing sloppy and undisciplined. Jalen Milroe has not been a very good decision maker, and quite frankly, this defensive line was getting bullied by South Carolina's offensive line. I think that's also one big storyline that I think is going to continue to get overlooked pretty much regularly. And in my South Carolina preview, the one player I kept talking about over and over again that I'm telling you need to get your eyes on him is Rocket Sanders. He had 16 rushing yards for 70. He had 16 attempts for 79 rushing yards with one touchdown and a couple key plays from him that really come to mind. I think of when South Carolina was on the goal line, and at first Rocket Sanders was getting stuffed, but I think what I really like about him is he stuck to the fundamentals. He really used his hips, got low to the ground, and was able to get just enough momentum to get him into the end zone on a really key third down. That was the one touchdown in the game where you thought to yourself, if you were from a South Carolina perspective, man, you got Alabama on the ropes right now, the exact where you want them at Bryant Denny Stadium. You have a full packed crowd, and then you have Kalen DeBoer shitting his pants just like he was just like he was in the Georgia game too, and that's exactly where you want him too, and give South Carolina, and I think South Carolina, although they did not, you know, ultimately win this game, but their secondary deserves a hell of a lot of credit, and that South Carolina defensive line, I'm telling you, you know, is a lot more respectable than last year. Because when I mentioned in my preview, one of the big worries I had about this South Carolina team was they were one of the worst passing. They were one of the worst passing defenses in all of the SEC last year, and for the most part, I'm not going to say it's perfect. I'm not going to sit there and say that they're like Kentucky, but it's definitely formidable. It's definitely respectable now. I think they I think that Shane Beamer is a hell of a coach. I think they've definitely done a lot to get better on that end. But when it comes to South Carolina, it always ends up being the turnovers, dude. It's just crazy. Like let's go back a little bit. I like Lenoir Sellers. I do think that if he decides to stay, which I really hope he does, because I want to see him more on Saturdays for the next couple years to come, because I do think he's going to be one of those guys in a year or two or now that we're going to be talking about in the limelight a lot more. So yes, he went 23 for 31, two touchdowns, one interception, 238 yards, and I think the play that's going to be kind of etched in my mind, not so much the 2 point conversion at the play, because yes, does Lenora Sanders Sellers, I keep saying, yeah, does Sellers need to be able to make that throw? Absolutely. You have to be able to make that throw in that critical moment. You probably replayed that play in practice so many times where you have that 2 point conversion situation. That play definitely was a little bit harder than it looked, because if you end up watching the replay, he had to scroll out to his right, and he kind of had to get the ball over the defender's head too, and it was a little bit on a weird angle, but that's still a throw that you have to make, because I give Loggins a lot of credit for some of the play calling that he drew up against this Alabama team. I mean, this Alabama team definitely just did not look like themselves at all. I mean, it was just a lot of missed assignments that I saw, and quite frankly, I think they what South Carolina did too that deserves a lot of credit is they kept Alabama honest. I mean, it wasn't just, oh, okay, we're just going to give it to Rocket Sanders every time, and then maybe we'll do a little bit of read option with Lenora Sellers and hope for the best. No, it was Sellers really did have some opportunities to really get a couple explosive plays to march them down the field. They had some really excellent drives that I was sitting there saying to myself, "Wow, this is if South Carolina can play like this and hold on to this is going to be a game that we're going to be talking about for a while." Especially after watching the Ole Miss game, you it was night and day seeing the difference between South Carolina's offense last week versus this week too. Especially when they go in and they whoop Kentucky too. It's like it's freaking Jackal and Hyde seeing this. But you know, back to that though. So the 2 point conversion, obviously they didn't get the play. They got the onside kick. So even for them to be even in this situation is just is just crazy enough, right? But to me, the play that I keep coming back to that I think really hurt them the most in terms of the actual momentum of the game, and ultimately what made the matchup kind of swing a little bit more towards Alabama I keep going back to that fumble on the zone read where Lenora Sellers, to me it looked like he kind of held onto the ball a little bit too long, where he just waited a split second too long in terms of making the decision of whether or not he wanted to hold on to the ball, and ultimately he ended up coughing up the ball. Alabama picks it up and drives down the field and scores a touchdown. I think when you think about that play, to me that was kind of when the wheels really started turning in terms of, okay, Alabama is now back in this game. And I'm not going to talk about Alabama too much right now. I'm going to make another episode where I'm fully going to be breaking down them and talking about what they have to do moving forward. This is all about South Carolina. This rest of the video is all going to be about South Carolina right now. But, in terms of, South Carolina too, I mean, you know, they had 3 fumbles on the day, and I just keep asking myself if they can just do a little bit better in terms of, you know, cleaning up the fumbles, cleaning up the sloppy play, just unnecessary turnovers left and right all the time. And also, dude, this Kyle Kennard kid has been so much fun to watch this year. I mean, every time that guy's on the screen, he's a threat. I mean, he had 6 tackles. He was giving Jalen Milroe a ton of trouble getting 2 sacks, and he's one guy that I've been watching throughout the season that I say to myself, like, wow, that kid's a freaking beast. Like I've I was getting goosebumps watching him, just seeing him, how explosive he is coming off the edge, and you know and getting to his spots, and doing all that, and really leading leading the charge on South Carolina's defense, and getting some really critical stops that ultimately had South Carolina, you know, pretty much winning the game up until the fourth quarter. And with that said too, I think all things considered, it's Definitely been a really difficult week for Carolina football. I don't think you should be completely counting them out because there's again it's still halfway to the year. North Carolina's 3-4, South Carolina's 3-3, and although the collapses of them or collapses of both teams are in some ways comical, in some ways um, deflating, but at the same time, there is something about Carolina football at the moment that has really been appealing and something that on this program I'm definitely going to try and keep covering. So stay tuned for more Carolina football and appreciate you watching the program.